Hello and welcome to the End of the Chain. I'm your host, Samuel McCullum, and I want to welcome you to this episode. I'm joined by Dr. Corey Petty, the Chief Security Officer for Status. We had a interesting discussion, and I don't think it's actually the end of everything that we needed to get to, because Corey has had a long history of building within the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, and has, I think, some very good nuanced views when it comes to security, privacy, and the importance of communication, which we get into quite deeply in this podcast. I think there's some really important topics that we cover. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and reach out if you have any questions or you disagree with anything that is said on the podcast. I'm happy to chat. All right, let's jump into the interview with Corey. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Corey Petty, the Chief Security Officer at Status. Now, Corey is more than just a Chief Security Officer. He's also the co-founder and co-host of the Bitcoin podcast, and has, I think, some really interesting views on communication and probably a deeper understanding of what it actually means to be building out a network like Bitcoin or some of the other networks that have been created afterwards, such as Ethereum or in your case, Status, that focus more on the communications aspect and how that propagation of data allows for greater freedoms and for an evolving society in this, I guess, surveyed and ever centralized age. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Petty, or Corey. Yeah, Corey. Yeah.
No, of course, fine. I usually don't like to push the moniker of doctor unless it's necessary for some particular argument. So thanks for having me on the show. And I look forward to kind of having this conversation. I find these topics really fascinating.
Tell me a little bit about working at Status and about how you actually ended up there, because you've only been there for like 2 years, and they've really done some amazing stuff over that short period of time.
Man, I guess it's all kind of been serendipitous. I left academia after finishing my PhD and doing some work in computational chemistry to pursue a blockchain career, mostly geared towards trying to leverage the skills I had gained during my PhD. It was kind of a data sciencey, but I've always been fascinated and heavily involved with computers from a technical perspective my whole life. And when I left, I found a couple of jobs in the government consulting industry, focused on educating them and building products leveraging blockchain, and making sure that people within the cleared spaces knew what they were talking about. So a lot of technical education, how things apply, where you couldn't apply them, so on and so forth. And then my goal there, was to make sure, I knew that governments and regulators and so on and so forth were looking into these things. And I also knew that they didn't have a lot of good quality resources for getting educated so they could make good decisions. So my kind of goal was to help that process so that they would make better decisions when they had to make them. But I guess the bureaucracy and kind of the way organizations work and the speed in which they work was not quite my level. And in the process of I had built some hobby projects doing analysis of very large projects in the space early in Ethereum with respect to how tokens were distributed for the early large ICOs. And one of those was Status. And I talked with Jared and Carl and became kind of friends with them, and just I always kept an eye on the project. And one day I was talking with Jared on a very different community-based project, and He asked what I did, and we talked, and I applied for the job and got it, and it's been a wonderful trip working with Status, because it's in my opinion exactly where I wanted to be in my career when I left academia. Like I'm currently in the position that I aspired to be in when I left academia and tried to pursue a blockchain career. So I think I've been incredibly fortunate and lucky in that process.
So you held a TS clearance, right? When you were working Booz Allen?
No, I was never cleared for anything. I had started going through the process, and it's a long and complicated process, and filled out a lot of the paperwork, but never actually went through any of the um, interviews. I got cleared for starting the interviews, but never started them, and I think that's for the best. I had told people that I didn't really want to go through the process because um, I didn't want to be beholden to the promises that you make when you do those things. It's very good for job security, but I wanted to maintain my freedom in pursuing whatever I wanted to pursue, as well as being able to say whatever I wanted to say when I wanted to say it, within a timely fashion, right? Because there's a lot of things you have to do in that process that I just didn't quite want to put myself through, and then be beholden to the decisions the rest of my life. And I think I'm pretty happy I made those decisions.
Yeah, I held a TS way back in the day. Because
I
was
very familiar with the ordeal of going through that.
Well, I was in the military, right? So it was a different perspective for me. I mean, I was, it's a whole different life, right? And so for me, getting my clearance, the training that I went through took 2 years, so it didn't really feel like I was doing much at the time. Plus, I was 18, and I didn't really have too much of a background at the time. So, for you being a little bit further along and not having just come out of high school, it works a little bit different, especially being on the civilian side. But I've just been so I got out in 2008, and that's when I lost my clearance, or it just didn't renew after that point. But I was always amazed by, like you said, the job security that you get from having it. That once you get it, it's really hard to lose, and that you pretty much have a really high paid guaranteed job for the rest of your life if you want it. And then also, I mean, the second thing that was also really interesting to me was the growth of these consulting companies or contracting companies, especially Booz Allen Hamilton, right? Which has a huge responsibility inside the Beltway, but most people probably don't know about them.
Yeah, they're heavily. That's where I worked. I was a part of Dark Labs, which was I guess an offensive hacker space, attempted with the goal of building products designed for fixing a lot of the security issues that were around. I was in a team of focused on blockchain initiatives and industrial control systems, which was fun for a while. It's like I got exposure to a lot of really, really great people who taught me a lot about security, which I'm incredibly thankful for. But working in such an organization, it's not my bag.
How long have you been out in that kind of DC area?
Let's see, running on 5 years now. I want to say between 4 and 5 years. So I moved out here working for a small contractor called Novetta, and then moved to Booz Allen. And then after that, after a little under a year there, I moved to Status, and I've been there for 2 years.
It's really interesting to see, the growth of all these contracting companies, right? And how much they're relied upon by the government. The fact that Booz Allen has a senior blockchain specialist, especially at that time in 2017 when everything was blowing up, with Bitcoin and everything else. I mean, was that a position that you carved out for yourself, or were they just scrambling for I guess somebody who would call themselves a blockchain developer at that point?
Let's see how I can answer this, because I have part of it's probably based on my opinions, which are probably
Hmm.
also based in ignorance here, because like with these organizations, especially the larger ones like Booz, like you don't get to know everything or the reasons behind them.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and
There's a lot of
so
compartmentalization.
I know that um, a lot of contracts were looking for Bitcoin expertise. I don't know which ones or what specifically they were looking for. So when I did educational things, I was doing very broad scoped technical explanations. And then when I moved to Booz Allen, I like that job was specifically carved out for me and my team. Um, they wanted something that leveraged, especially around the time in which we joined, when things were like just going crazy. They're like, "Oh, this is going to take off. Let's start building products that leverage this new technology, so we can say we have skin in the game." I think there was some higher leadership that was just wanted to say they did blockchain, and they could point to us, and um, like it worked out that like the team that I was on was a very small team, but we were incredibly efficient in getting things done. And I can boast, I think, that I'm very technically versed across this technology in terms of how it works, how to use it, what works and what doesn't, and staying along the ideals of uh, why blockchain is useful versus just a glorified database.
I just spoke with Alexander Zadelson from Beam, and he said that if Satoshi was building today, he would have built in privacy because this open database that we give is just too much of a honeypot for, I don't know, intelligence agencies like the NSA or any other foreign government intelligence agency that wants to track all on-chain transactions and be able to identify money flows across the network. Where do you stand on this privacy issue?
I agree with him in the sense that um, if I had to prognosticate what Satoshi would do if he started today, he would be incorporating um, a lot of the technology that's been actually developed or funded um, directly because of what he built. Right, like he built something that solved a computational consensus problem, uh, and then as it grew, it became a data mine for financial information because everything's public and included. And as a response of that publicity and lack of privacy, we've been able to actually fund a lot of the applied cryptography that wasn't quite getting the focus that it needed beforehand to fix those problems. So in a sense, like he's enabled a lot of that research and development and applicable cryptography that we have today. Um, but like as it stands today, and there are solutions in the pipeline specifically for Bitcoin and any other ones that help address these type of privacy concerns that obfuscate actually a little more of the information, like Taproot and Schnorr signatures. But if you want like real privacy, which is an eventuality in my opinion, you start using things like zero knowledge proofs and like all of the different applications of zero knowledge proofs being embedded that really allow you to kind of verify that something is following the rules without showing any of the information inside of it. And so right now, like in applications like Status, like that's probably the least private thing that we have is when people interact with the blockchain. And that's not because we can't do anything about it. It's just kind of the nature of the technology at this point.
How do you bake that into a product like Status then, and trying to identify these privacy concerns, and then build a specific, or I guess a privacy focused messaging app that is both convenient but also secure?
Well, that's the $1 million question.
Right.
Uh, it starts, in my opinion, with using the available technology appropriately and setting appropriate defaults that lean towards the side of privacy and security for the user. And then you provide them with options on changing those like available levers but only in a way that allows them to do so in an informed manner, so that when they make a decision that's going to impact their privacy or security, they're able to make it with the appropriate information at hand when they make it. So they're not doing something and then retroactively figuring out that they exposed themselves, or attached a wallet to a chat message that they didn't want exposed, or things like that. So like at the end of the day, when you make a decentralized technology that pushes um, all of the value and management and freedom to the end user, you're pushing all the security and responsibility with it too. And the only way to really build products that um, allow those people to maintain their privacy and security is to give them all the options that they could possibly have, defaulting towards um, private and secure, and then allowing them to change it however they want to change it, but like done in an informed way.
In theory, WhatsApp should exist outside of Facebook. Facebook bought WhatsApp for, was it $2 billion?
A lot of money.
Like a decade ago. And recently, in the past few years, the original co-founder of WhatsApp left because he was unhappy with the path that Facebook had taken in regards to WhatsApp. And it's probably pretty common knowledge now that Facebook bought WhatsApp to get the extremely huge data mine of information generated through billions of messages every single day, and take all that data and put it into their analytical algorithms so that they can better understand user behavior and linguistics and anything else that they're building over at Facebook. And so that, I guess, intrusion into user privacy, into user messaging, has allowed them as a company to grow to billions of dollars. Now, this type of model is also similar in respect to Google and Twitter and pretty much any other major tech company that exists today. So when we talk about Web3 and a company maybe like Status, these are companies that are trying to buck the trend of taking people's taking people's information and then using it for third-party purposes of generating ads or building linguistic models off of it, and then using that information that's generated from their user base to then generate extra revenue. So in Web3, the idea is that you're supposed to control your information. It's supposed to be more secure. How is a company like Status able to compete against a company where their outright goal is to monitor and survey their customers so that they could analyze them and know them at a deeper level than that Web3 company could?
Outcompete in what way? Are we
Well,
trying to make more
remember,
money? Are we trying to get the same users, or like what's the outcompete here? Because like our goal isn't necessarily to like replace everything. It's to give people the option in case if they want it. I want it to be useful.
Yeah.
For everyone to be able to use it with their friends and family and build the things they need. But like I think, I'm not sure. I don't know when it's going to be until we reach the level of convenience of these highly optimized, surveilled products, right? They're able to do what they do because they have all of the information, and they're unapologetic about using it for their own gain.
Right. So how does a more decentralized product where that's not spying on its users and then using that data to create highly probable, I guess is the right term, user models of how their users will act or spend money so that they could increase their revenues and grow as a company? So how is it the decentralized version is able to compete with them, right? Because if the idea is that if you provide the same level of convenience as one of the big four, right, one of the fangs, you still have to compete with them for advertising dollars or other types of revenues that may flow through both companies. Correct?
Yeah. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not sure, but like
Yeah.
my intuition tells me that we have a very vast unexplored space of what a social network actually is. And blockchain networks so far are kind of the um, historical fingerprint of the results of the social network, if you will, right? If we look at what information is provided inside of any blockchain network, it's the result of some transaction, some form of communication relationship that happened that had some type of, in most cases, a value transfer, right? And we're not seeing 80 to 90% of what that interaction is. When you include like ephemeral communication and decentralized applications that facilitate these communications and storage, and put that all into one, you really, really are able to grasp and capture all of the other parts of that relationship and like what communities care about, what they're talking about, what they're doing, how value is moving, so on and so forth. And I think if we are able to enable that, there's a plethora of new ways to capture what users want and what they're doing, and maybe even anticipate what they'd like to do in the future without compromising their privacy and security. You can capture this type of like communication noise or like community noise on what people want, what they're talking about, so on and so forth, by participating in it and looking at anonymized data or group aggregated data and get really, really, really good information by not just like hoarding a bunch of really, really personal information and then taking advantage of it. I think that's my personal vision of like what could happen if we're really able to like push forth this idealized vision of Web3.
It still is the early days of Web3, though. It's
Yeah.
only,
Oh yeah.
yeah. I guess you could say Bitcoin is the beginning of Web3, and it's been just over a decade then, with the first really major apps and companies arriving in 2017, 18, and starting to really grow now. I think it comes slowly and all of a sudden where you have you're already seeing it in Bitcoin where, Bitcoin is boring, right? There's not much to really to develop on in its identity at this point. It's been fleshed out by a lot of people who put a lot of effort into thinking about its past, present, and future. And now it's just a matter of companies to be able to take that vision and build it out, right? And at this point, it's just a not when, but or not if, but when, right?
I think there's still hope for Bitcoin expanding its usability. Like it's as it stands today, you can do some things, but other networks like Ethereum, in my opinion, do it better and more generalized. But I think some of the potential tech that could find its way into the base protocols, such as Schnorr signatures and Taproot and things like that, drastically expand what you can do with it. And that time being, like I don't want to like I'm not spending my time there because I can't do anything. And Ethereum, as it stands today, is the best place to be building, um, like experimenting with what you can do with this technology and building things on top of it that allow you to kind of explore this new way of like facilitating communication between people that includes value. That's the thing is like because this technology is so early, I'm not comfortable naming what's going to be used in 5 years or what we're going to call blockchain or Web3.
Right, exactly. Because there's a lot of development that has been happening.
It's just so much, and there's so much room for expansion. Like we're still, like, think about all that we've built since Bitcoin has come up, because people were able to start thinking about building things differently, um, because Bitcoin existed and worked and grew, and the value that it grew with it allowed people to kind of fund themselves to experiment in this new paradigm of building stuff. And that's going to keep happening because we've just now started thinking about how to build stuff this way.
The big four, so the fangs versus Web3 issue, is something that I think about quite a lot, because we've been trained to just be so desensitized to the amount of data that is given up on a daily basis. And so my background, right? I was originally a linguist, but then they retrained me to be a signals intelligence analyst. And so I worked with systems that were at the NSA and got to see the horde of metadata that was collected and what could be done with that. And so, I mean, this kind of ties into what I was speaking about earlier, where, you know, Bitcoin is this perfect open network of metadata that, in the right hands with the right connecting data. So if you're an intelligence agency that has access to all the records of all the centralized exchanges and all the fiat on ramps, off ramps, you can really build a near perfect picture of what the holdings look like, who has it, where the money's going, and you know, do
Entity analysis on the Bitcoin blockchain is very easy.
Yeah, I mean, I talked with the police officer about this just a while back. He said, you know, it's as soon as things get onto the blockchain, they're super easy to track. People think that they're smart, that they're gonna, you know, change their Bitcoin for Monero and make a few transactions, but they don't really understand what they're playing with and what they're using. And so when they do that, they think they're in the clear, and all of a sudden they have this perfect data trail that can be used by law enforcement. And so, I mean, when I came into Bitcoin, that was the thing that interested me the most, was the metadata, this giant database of every single transaction that's ever taken place, and the ability for companies to exploit and use that in maybe positive or even malicious ways.
It's a very fascinating topic, and one that's going to continue to evolve over time. I've had a few conversations with people who actively want to figure out what they can capture inside of the blockchain space. I mean, I previously talked with Chainalysis and Elliptic a long time ago, and had conversations about different privacy techs. And I mean, I'm still friends with a bunch of people who I used to work with, and they're curious about how the stuff works. And it's one of those situations that I keep trying to inform them that, like, the technology will get better. It's not there yet, and it's an eventuality that everything will be obfuscated. Like, it's just not. It's so their methods and tools and things they look for are going to have to change, and getting accustomed to the way things work now inside blockchain is not going to behoove them. But it's stupid to not take advantage of it now.
How does that apply to Status? Like, what sort of data do your users give up? I mean, if this is something that you can talk about.
Oh, we're open. We're completely open with everything we do. So, like, in terms of the communications protocol, it's very hard to find information about who's talking to who and what they're talking about, unless you're an intended recipient. Even if you're a passive onlooker to the network, you can't read what's in a public channel unless you know the name of the public channel, or unless you've broken encryption. So that you have way worse problems if that's the case.
Yeah.
And if it's a private chat, that's all done with extra layers of encryption with, double ratchet. We use Signal's Open Whisper Systems double ratchet scheme and X3DH, things like that. So we're using whatever available technology we have to really amp up conversational security, as well as minimize the like centralized points of failure or reliance on status for any of this stuff to operate. And so like if status dies, the technology lives, the network stays alive, and so on and so forth. Like, and it's very open and clear. The problem with that, and also like for account creation, you don't need any personal identifiable information to create an account and start using the network to talk and chat and communicate and transact. Um, so what do we do? Because if you use the blockchain, you're going to disclose financial information about yourself, or at least in a pseudonymous way. And the more personal information that you attribute to that account, the more of a trail you leave behind you. And so the only thing we can do now is start from scratch. You don't require anything. And then inform you when you're making these decisions. Like one of the features we have in the application is ENS usernames. So if you would like a identifiable, unique username that people can search for and start chatting, and it shows up, then you make a transaction and you secure a subdomain of the stateofus.eth ENS record, so people can find you, and you attach your public key to. But at the same time, you're staking S&T to do this, which then exposes some wallet that's linked to your name. And there's not much we can do about that if we want to offer that feature up, at least for the time being. And so we just have to inform people that this is now a public account. People can see it, and the wallet that's attached to it. So if you don't want to do that, then you shouldn't use that feature or make another account that doesn't have it. And so that's the best we can do for now, is to make sure that we have strong conversational security and inform people when they make decisions like becoming discoverable in a network easily. Like these are fundamental trade-offs. If you want to be easily discoverable, you need to put something out there.
I'm a heavy Telegram user, and I think probably most people are that are in crypto space, and they have built an interesting product. I really like it. I like a lot of the features, but because of its origins and because of the code itself not being open source, there's a lot of questions that I have about its privacy and security. And I know that Pavel's answered a lot of these, but I think there's still this veil of fuscation, which you're just not able to see if they're being completely honest and secure with your information. And I know that there are probably certain things that they're not disclosing that allow for encryption, just weakness in their system for people to come in and monitor either me or whomever else I'm speaking with, even when I'm trying to have private conversations. So I'm actually looking forward to the release of Status to see, can it be a good replacement for Telegram? Because that's what I want to replace, right? Mm-hmm. And is it going to give me the same functionality and also convenience as what I'm using on a day-to-day basis?
Our goal is to make sure that answer is yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for as well.
That's for sure. Like we want to be the communications application that people use, that for a broad scope of people. One, are people who are like you, who care about these things and want to have strong confidence around their privacy and security, or two, people who don't care and they just want to use it to access something they couldn't access elsewhere, like anything on Web3. But like, doing it for everyone is very difficult, and it takes time in terms of scaling, right? So like, being able to support 1 billion users in a decentralized way as their daily driver for communications is really hard. And so we gotta slowly build that up. Like, we can support quite a few users now. We haven't hit capacity yet based on the new scaling features we've rolled out, like Waku. And we're going to continue to kind of build that out in such a way where we don't compromise privacy and security, or at least, like, if you need a scaling solution based on like bandwidth or resource consumption, you're able to turn on something as a user in an informed way that allows you to kind of operate within the network the way you should. But if you need all the bells and whistles with respect to privacy and security, you may pay a cost in bandwidth, but at least you're able to do that. And going back to kind of what you said earlier about how Telegram operates, and you like the product, but you're not quite sure, is a matter of trust. Like, how can you figure that out? How do you get that information? You can't.
Well,
you just have to
you
trust them.
can't. Exactly. If the code is an open source, there's nothing that you can do to see that they're not that there's not any sort of windows for a malicious third party to come in and take your data.
Yeah. Like it's part of our principles to never operate that way. Like, there should be no, I mean, in the real ultimate sense, our job is to make our job obsolete. Like, you shouldn't have to rely on us at all. Like, there's always going to be some form of status as an organization. But in reality, if we do things correctly, you won't need us.
I mean, that's a good place to be at, right?
That's a really good place to be. Like, how you do that, I'm not sure. That's kind of the difficulty I think a lot of companies are trying to kind of figure out, is how do you do that and still fund yourself? How do you have a day job? And how do you build network value that supports the continuing development of the network?
In the past, since 2016, we've seen a growth of the idea of disinformation across social platforms and messaging systems, and that you have these extremely malicious third parties that are publishing large amounts of content in the hopes of confusing people or converting their opinion to be a certain way. I mean, you don't even have to look that far to see what Cambridge Analytica did, or state actors as well too. The U.S. probably included. Probably every state actor is producing content to change the hearts and minds of people around the world. Are decentralized systems such as Status more exploitable in this respect, in that because there's a greater level of anonymity, you're not exactly sure who's on the opposite side of your communication, and able to, I guess, verify their identity and know that they're a trusted source?
What a great question. I guess technically, a more general system, in terms of I mean that by one that's less constrained or controlled, is more susceptible to people saying things that aren't true and continuing without consequence, because that control doesn't exist. And there's a few things that I think we as a company can do, and then a few changes that we as a society can do, that are like kind of, in my opinion, necessary to happen. And so, as a company, as Status, we can eventually build tools that allow you to have better situational awareness in the context that you're in terms of who's saying what and how much you know about that person. Things like ENS usernames, those are unique. And so if you've gone through the rigmarole of trusting that you're talking to someone that you're talking to, then you have much stronger guarantees that that can't be faked. It's very difficult to impersonate an ENS username. It's a very strong guarantee that whoever owns that private key is the person you think they are. And so you have very strong fundamental guarantees that the person who owns the private keys and controls that account isn't someone else. But because there's no guaranteed attachment of identity to that thing, then until you have stronger feelings about who they are than they say are in real life, then that you can be duped. And so, like, it's on us to build things out in a way that allow people to attest who they are and attach it to private keys when they want to do that, so
Mhm.
that you can be more confident that who you're talking to is who you think they are. And that way you have very strong confidence that they're not being what's the word I'm looking for, uh,
Manipulated.
manipulated
Yeah.
or fished in some way.
Right.
And then as a society, it's about conducting yourself appropriately on the internet, like, and having more situational awareness and thinking about whether or not who you're talking to is who you think they are. Because the way the traditional web is been created, like, we don't think about these things. We assume that the platform we're using takes care of all of that stuff for us. And I think that's a very bad way to build a society, by offloading a bunch of responsibility to someone you don't know, who is profiting. Their whole goal is to profit off of you. And so by building a lot of these systems, then we're trying to change that social shift so that people start even asking the question, like, how do I know this is the person I'm talking to? Or like, what has this person done to prove that? Or like they're no longer relying on someone else. They're using their own facilities to do it.
Wait, is there any way to build? I mean, Twitter has their blue check marks, right? And same for
Mhm.
Instagram and Facebook. Is there any way to build an attestation system like that into Status,
Oh,
where,
absolutely. There's a lot of different ways to do that.
yeah,
I think it's more interesting to build standards. Like, I don't want status. Maybe we come up with an outstanding identification system. Like, ENS usernames is a start to that. Um, we may end up using a similar feature that identifies who core contributors are. And so, like, it's a better way to know that someone is a core contributor of status when speaking inside of a channel, and that may give us like a nice little like social boost, so that people can be more clear when we're giving advice or talking about things on how to do stuff, or pointing you to information on how to learn more. Uh, and there's a tremendous amount of things you can do with this technology, uh, but we want to build it in a way that uh, doesn't rely on us to maintain it and build it. Like, people should be able to use whatever system they want, in whatever context they want, in whatever community they want. And how you conduct yourself, or how much you want to verify specific information within those communication channels, may vary depending upon what you're talking about. And so, like, brute forcing a specific way across all forms of communication seems like a bad idea to me.
does Status have a responsibility to protect its users then?
Mm. We have a responsibility to build good software that allows people to conduct themselves the way they want to in an informed way. Like, I think, especially like in the whole context of Web3, the application developers have a tremendous amount of responsibility, but they're giving up on purpose a lot of the control and giving it to the end users. The responsibility becomes into building it in such a way where the defaults are secure, and allowing the user to conduct themselves appropriately. Because, like, if you give up all of this responsibility and security and so on and so forth, and value, and give it to the user, you need to allow them to understand what they have and have all the options they need to do what they want to do. That's the only thing you can do if you relinquish control of everything. I mean, you have a better method? I haven't thought of one yet.
I think that if Facebook is the primary company to look at in this respect, where they have essentially had to become a political body that has to take a stance at some point on what is said on their network, because people have exploited it for misinformation campaigns or other purposes which are not positive for overall social health
Hmm.
and goodness. So let's just say, like, vaccines, right? Very I don't think it's a controversial topic, but apparently it is. And Facebook has taken a stance that they are removing anti-vax content from their website, and they also are shutting down groups and other places where people may talk about this as a way to spread what they call misinformation. So whether or not these people are misinformed or not, I mean, I would think they are, but apparently it's a political conversation. It's a health and safety one as well too. But if you had these groups appearing on Status where you have campaigns of misinformation, what can be done to stop them, or at least, does it not stop them, but would it put Status in a place where they would have to become a political body at some point and say that this type of speech is not?
We don't condone this, right?
Well, it's not allowed on our platform, right?
Well, that's the thing. Is like we don't have control over these things. Like the Status network or the communication network itself is an open and permissionless network. The Status client, the mobile app that accesses it, is just an implementation. And so the protocols that we're building are completely open. Anyone can use them. Anyone can build a client to access the network and participate. Same as the Ethereum network, right? It's just an open protocol that anyone can use. If they craft a valid transaction, it'll get processed. And if any implementation of software that makes a political decision and says we're not going to process these things, that has consequences, but they're easy to get around. And so we as Status can make political decisions if we feel like we need to, but it's not going to stop anyone from doing it if they have the resources and the desire to make their own implementation and do it, because we're not going to make the protocol do it. And a part of what responsibility Facebook has to answer these types of things and have stances on political matters is because they have access to the information and the control to do something about it. Like, we can't see who's talking to who about what. And if we can't see that, then how are we going to do something about it? We can not condone it. We can make public statements about things we do. We can make our specific clients not render certain types of conversations or certain channels and so on and so forth. But the network will always be open. And how we act and what we do in a world where people are using our platform for things we don't like is an internal conversation we're going to have eventually, with any modicum of success in a sufficiently open and permissionless network. There's going to be people who use it that do things that you don't like. But there's also, like, it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways.
Right. And I think that the argument that I was more playing devil's advocate here, right? In that I believe in more freedom and the ability to have conversations that people may think are controversial. Obviously, there is a line that can be crossed, or that there is a clear line that can be crossed, which it devolves into criminal activity. But like most of the time, you don't need highly intrusive surveillance capabilities to identify and then shut down that criminal activity. Most of the time, the normal way of policing and investigating is enough to find people who are carrying out criminal activities, because while they may be able to hide their activities online, there's definitely more traces that exist in real life, and it's much harder to hide yourself offline than it is online if you're smart about it.
I agree, and I don't condone this activity, and I'm the first person to say that.
Yeah,
like, if there is something that I see that is wrong, and I have the facilities to identify it and report it, then I will. But
the government argument, or the
go ahead.
Yeah, so but the government argument is that we need access to your system to make sure that there is no we need access to your system to crack down on this type of activity.
Yeah, that'll never happen with Status ever.
Right.
I
But
would never let that happen.
It's the wrong framing.
Yeah.
It makes communications provider liable for providing that data. There's a strange responsibility on the communications provider, like your ISP, to provide that information directly to the government, and that they understand that their users might be using encryption, but most people don't use encryption, or at least they think they're using encryption, but then there's weak points within their with how the data is transmitted, where it opens it up. So, WhatsApp says that all of its messages are end-to-end encrypted, but they're not. There's plain text. There's plain text copies of all of your conversations stored on a database somewhere, and while at the endpoints it may be end-to-end encrypted, it doesn't mean that is not plain text along the way.
Or you're not also fully aware of what they consider who the intended recipients are.
Right. And this isn't disclosed. They just make it easy for you to install this app, but then don't tell you what exactly you're giving up by giving that sort of information. So I think it's a shift back into saying that I want the power to disclose to whom I want to, right? So I don't really even believe. So there's this common phrase of own your own data, but I don't even think that is the right way to go, because that assumes that there's still people who are trying to take your data from you and use it without your consent to be able to do certain third-party actions to maybe deliver better ads or develop a deeper user profile of who you are for some purpose. But even in that sense, right, giving up that data in the first place just doesn't sit right with me. And so the idea that you can disclose your data to a third party, but you don't control your data after it's gone, right? It's not really like an on-off switch where you can just say, okay, I want this one person to have my data and I don't want anybody else, because once they have it, then they can share it with whomever they want. There's like, if you look at the Ring, I think it's the Ring doorbell, in their privacy policy, by agreeing to it, you are agreeing to them giving out your data to, I think, like 1,000 other third-party vendors. Yeah.
So it's a wonderful surveillance network.
Right. And those vendors have no responsibility to protect your data. And if it is lost or hacked or something, they're indemnified and they have zero liabilities. So I think there's problems with that. And we've gotten to the point where this data surveillance economy that exists is just too complicated for any one person to really take enough time to decide whether they want to engage with it or not. And you look at like just installing anything on your computer, right? You have a 100-page privacy policy with addendums and arbitrage clauses that effectively prevent you from ever going and seeing what happens with the company. And thankfully GDPR has kind of opened this up to where now you can go and see how much data is being collected on you. But I think it's the amount of people that are actually requesting that data is incredibly small, probably 0.001% of all people. So I don't know. I really don't know where we go from here and how you bring about the changes of shifting the responsibility of privacy away from the user to make sure that they're engaged in private encrypted transactions that are not being used without their consent, and moving that as just a default stance, right? Where it's always encrypted, always private, and that you have to provide explicit consent for people to take your data and then go use it. I don't know how you get there.
I think it starts with there's a few roads, but you got to start by giving the people who need it and really want it the option to have it. Like, and that means you may be catering to a small group of people, but if you really get it right for them and usable, then you can start taking steps forward and expanding that audience. You also can maybe co-opt. I mean, that's the wrong word to use, but like get a bunch of people to be using it and not know it by providing use cases that you just can't get anywhere else, right? Like Status, as an example, like has a lot more functionality in it as a communication protocol. Like it's kind of better than WeChat because we can do so many things in a single application with a lot of control, just natively in the chat. And there's a lot of features that we can build that you can't do otherwise because we're a blockchain enabled communication app. And so if you can make that easy for people, then you can get a lot of people to start using really, really, really good security and privacy protocols without even knowing it. And then if you're providing the right options for the people who really need it, then you're kind of fighting multiple battles at once. And I'm not sure which one is the more important battle. I think providing options for people who need them, who want to opt out into the systems that don't allow them to conduct themselves the way they'd like to, is incredibly important. And then building a lot of cool features, because like I want to use this myself and I want my friends to use it, and I want my family to use it. And I want people to communicate with me only through Status. And I don't need 16 chat applications open all the time, even though I have them. But like it's a really hard thing to do and takes a lot of time and care. And I think if you're not careful about the process of building that out, or you have your priorities misconstrued, you can really start to veer in a direction that you didn't intend to be in the first place, by like building a future that gets a lot of people that accidentally compromises a bunch of security, and you kind of say like, oh, we'll put it off, we'll fix it later. Or like you make compromises in your technology to scale appropriately so that you can get a bunch of users and you say, we'll fix this later on the line, but never do. And so we try to be very cognizant about those things and build things according to our principles and really provide like real privacy and security, like first, and then build features after that. Because like people have to change their attitude. They have to conduct themselves differently if any of this stuff is to take off and work.
Well, Status kind of fits in with the three-part purpose for Ethereum, right? Mm-hmm. And that Ethereum wanted to have on-chain logic that supported decentralized file storage, and then also secure messaging as well too. Mm-hmm. And you're right; it does fall in line with what the idea of, I guess, the general philosophy of what's being built on Ethereum. And over the past year or two, you've seen huge growth in the on-chain logic to be used for developing decentralized financial applications, or just financial applications in general. And I think that messaging will probably be one of the next big things that comes out, right? Because secure data communication is more than just me and you sending bits of data back and forth. Or me and you sending text messages back and forth. It's the ability for data to propagate out and move freely around a network in a secure manner where it's not being surveyed and exploited. So my hope is that Web3 somehow can break the chain of this surveillance economy that we have found ourselves in, and that it can hopefully provide a new method and a new convenient method for people to transact value, right? Because that's at the end of the day what these networks are built for, to transact value freely and to provide secure communication and across an entire distributed global network.
I would slightly alter that and say and lump transact value in with communication. In my opinion, value transfer is a form of communication. It's just the way it's worked on the blockchain is there's a permanent record for it. That's the only way you can do it digitally. And the meat of the context of that communication is usually ephemeral. And so by incorporating chat protocols and ephemeral messaging and data storage, and you have that trifecta, you really, that's the only way to get the real relationship and communication, like all of it, instead of just getting a slice of it. And we think that's really important. That's kind of our goal, is to make sure that people who use our app are capable of really communicating and not just communicating in some slice.
I think that's important. I think that's what gets lost a lot in crypto today, is that people focus more on the price when really the method of communication is the most important part. And it's price is just an outcome rather than a underlying structure, which provides support and actually holds up the system itself. So yeah, well, cool. Corey, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Yeah, that was great.
Covered quite a bit. Yeah.
Well, I guess to wrap up, you can find us Status.im. Go download the app. It's in the app stores. Get started. Start chatting. Ask us questions. Figure out. Tell us what's wrong. Tell us what's right. We want to make it better. And we have a lot of things coming in the pipeline. We have a tremendous amount planned of expanding and making it more useful and allowing people to do all the things that I mentioned in this podcast. And we're very open to feedback, to additions, to work. If you want to feature, you're more than welcome to add it and make a pull request. And so just come and chat with us, and we'll be happy to have you.
Well, that's great. I actually did not get to cover everything that I wanted to, so we're going to have you back.
Perfect.
In soon, because I only got to. I'm thinking about everything else I wanted to speak about, and this was probably about half. So
there's a lot of things that we do. We cover a very broad swath. With a lot of infrastructure, a lot of products, a lot of decentralized applications, developer tooling. Like we really do cover the gamut of the entire stack. We didn't get to talk about a lot of it. So, yeah.
Well, great. I thank you for coming on. Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, thanks for having
me. Hey, thank you, Corey, for coming on and being a great guest. We'll have to have you back sometime soon. I hope that everybody enjoyed this. Make sure to subscribe so you get all the latest podcasts from the end of the chain. And come check out the website. We have some cool stuff there. If you want to get the latest updates on what's going on at the end of the chain, make sure to join our email list. You'll get a update as soon as all the podcasts go out. And I just want to say thank you as our listeners. Also, nothing on this podcast is financial advice, so take it as it comes. See you next episode, guys.